Okay, I think most people are here, if not everyone is here. We still have a few minutes, but I mean, actually, we can start anytime. Just like to say, Zhang Laoshi at the end is the observer, as I said today. So she's going to sit there and observe everyone. And actually, we invite everyone to ask questions as is of interest to you. And before I start, actually, I want to go through some admin stuff. So I see everyone has submitted the homework 1, homework 2, so everyone gets extra credits, okay? But assignment 1, 2, 3, some people are still, working on it, and that's fine. As I said before, this is totally okay. I've actually extended the due dates to next Friday for assignment 2, and next Friday for assignment 3. Sorry? Sorry, that's right. Okay, because I have to submit the grades by 16th. All right, so, and then you need to give me a few days to read stuff also. Okay, now, but if you have problems, just write to me. Okay, don't worry about it. I told you that the point for me here for the assignments is to get you guys to engage. Okay, not really, it's like, I mean, the grade is just to reflect like how much effort and how much you get it, but actually that requirement is very, very flexible for me, okay? Okay, if you still need help on some assignments like if that have closed, all right, because you're still working at things, I can open it again, it's fine, all right? Just so that by the 16th, as long as you guys turn in the work, I'm happy to just give you the credit with no penalty. It's fine. This is not easy, okay? I do admit that this course is not easy to do what we ask you to do, but if you need help, let me know, okay? All right, so at this point, I want to open this first for this few minutes first for any questions you have for all the models that we have been doing. So open Q&A first. Before we go into the issues, the other issues that we have to talk about, kind of loose ends that we have to tie up for this entire class. All right, so what loose ends there are, that we're going to be talking about later on. First, well, let's review what we have talked about in class already over this past 15 to 16 weeks or so, okay? So just to recap the models that we have talked about, the first one is the basic perceptron. And I assume everyone knows this very well by now. Things like logic gates, if those two are on, then the outcome is on or off, depending on the inputs. The basic perceptron. Then we went on to talk about, you need a, sorry. Yeah, here we go. Then we went to talk about autoencoders. Okay, so I'm going to say that this is logic. This is about logic gates. Okay, and then this is about content addressable. Memory. Again, I like to draw like nice icons like that, right? You guys know what this means. Okay, and then this one is like, you might have five units, and it's kind of looks something like that. Okay, so you jog your memory, right? Actually, I don't think I need to, because you probably have traumatized by doing the assignments for this kind of thing, right? And then the next model that we did was multi-layer perceptron. So evolving from number 1, we went on to do number 3, perceptron, okay? And specifically using this model to evaluate the use of backpropagation of error. Okay, in order to train the network, and it looks like that. So okay, and you know what this means, right? So there's a delta here. Okay, little nice icons to kind of tag your graphic about what those networks, how those networks work, what they do. And then finally, we have the von der Mausberg, which is about self-organization. Okay, and so this is the von der Mausberg. Okay, and the way this works is the trauma here, I don't want to draw the dots, but the trauma here is that you have these hexagons, right? And then like you have these orientations, and then you feed into bigger hexagons with excitatory and inhibitory weights, and with the notion of spatial constraints, and therefore you get selectivity. Okay, so we've covered quite a lot, and I just want to open this up at this point. Anyone has any questions about what we've covered so far? Because later the issues that we're going to talk about pertain to all of these models, and in fact they pertain to models that are being used nowadays, like large language models. So any questions at all that you guys have come up with over the course? Yeah.
Okay, so one of the courses of past few weeks we've learned like how the models are, like how it works, how we change operations to sort of fit and what we want to do, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But how does it fit in the like, macro scheme of things? Like how does like image categorization, for example, when I show it an image of like a bicycle,
Yeah.
what is it actually encoding? Is it encoding
Great question.
color or different layers? Like there's a layer for color, a layer for shape, and then what's the? I mean, if I was sorry, what's the input actually?
Right, right. Any other related questions, or someone to venture an answer? I know some of you already deal with like advanced neural networks, so you should know the answer. So. No attempt? That is a great question. I have to qualify something first, is that these models that we are using are very, very, very basic. Obviously, you know, right? And they're already difficult enough at this basic level, okay? So that kind of, what you're asking is about scaling and expansion. Like, okay, so from this basic one, how do we bring it to like a more realistic, ecologically valid case? Okay, so for, let's say, things like pictures with color and objects, not just lines and stuff, okay? In a way, we sort of address that in, or I kind of picked that up at the end of the self-organization thing when I shared with you the paper that I did for when I took this class long, long time ago, right? Was sort of beginning to address that question, which was that, for example, we have a model that is able to do this. I'm going to change color so that we can see. Okay. We have a model that can recognize that at one particular location in space, there is like different line orientations. Okay, fine and good, right? So this model, you know, this VDM system, that big visual cortex that we simulate, okay, can recognize that in this location in space, there is some vertical or horizontal or slanting lines. Then we got to ask, okay, if we want to go higher level, you know, it's not just lines, right? Obviously, we recognize objects. So then what's an object? What makes an object an object? Okay, so it's these light energy signals that are hitting our retina, but it's not just simple line orientations. It's like in this bigger patch in space. So let's say if I draw a bigger expanded space, okay? And in this area here, I get a set of line orientations. And to us, we recognize that, wait, there's a square there, or there's a box, okay? So what that means is that actually what is being encoded, and is it bright? I guess it's okay, all right, is small patches of hexagons, right? And jointly, you know, you can expand that into the whole coordinate space. But jointly then, the orientations at each of this location combine to give us the sensation that there is a object there. And obviously, once you jump from this scale to this scale, it's not so hard to jump from here to just more complex objects like cats, pictures of cats, or with you know, maybe like complex things like well, cats is pretty complicated actually, right? So if you combine many locations and the line orientations, then that is the basic. When you do that, then you get the basic amount of information you need to constitute something more complex than just lines. The next higher level being like features, right? Visual features. So like squares, shapes, you know, squiggly lines. And then if you go higher than that, you get objects, right? Okay, so we have to talk about this from the external point, like in terms of the visual space in the physical environment, what constitutes an object are these signals. So therefore, in our brain or in the simulation that we need, what do we need in order to encode that? So there's already a clue there, because this von der Malsburg network, one sort of instantiation that we did, is responsible or is busy encoding one patch of space. If we want to say that the object is made of several patches of these, that means that we need a bigger encoding, or we need to have each patch of space being connected to that one model that we have. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you want to say like at a higher level, then how do we translate that? Well, we got to think of things that way. What exactly are these features that constitute objects and all that? And then, therefore, logically, what do we need in terms of our model in order to encode that information? Okay? So now this is simple. I'm still just talking about simple contrast because it's about lines and then lines making up objects and shapes. You also mentioned color. Okay? Now, we'll actually talk about that later in one of the convolutional neural networks. We'll talk about that later. But color would be something, so think about, okay, I throw it back to you. What is color? You guys do neuroscience, right? You know what's color. What's color? I mean, in the biological sense. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So just rehash NeuroBio 101, right? Okay. You've got what are the colors? Green. Blue and red, right? Actually, there's no yellow, right? Yeah. and okay, so this is the basic physical property here is that in our visual space, we have three different types of base wavelengths of light, okay? And they hit our retina again. So somewhere along the line, these wavelengths, okay, they hit our retina, okay, our eyes, all right? And we have these cells, these ganglia. Let's call them, I forgot what it is, red, blue, oh, well, okay, there's two types, right? There's contrast, red, green, and blue, yellow, or something like that, right? So that those cells, they are sensitive, they fire, so they send their signals, okay? So they fire. When there's a signal, there's an input, then their output has that property, has that nonlinear, thresholded This one you recognize, right? It's the nonlinear activation function. They become active when the input AI that they are interested in is having greater and greater, signal. Then at some threshold theta level, they send an output AJ. Okay, so in this case, the AI is whether or not. Okay, so you can say the probability that the AI is equals to, let's say, that there is a green signal. Okay, when this retinal neuron receives some level of green frequency, okay, its molecules in there that are sensitive to the green frequency will then cause the neuron or the cell, right, to trigger some translate that energy into electrical energy, and then fire, as long as it passes the theta. Okay, so that's color at that level. Okay, so what about psychologically? What is color? It's very, very hard. It's a very, very abstract thing, isn't it? It's a very philosophical question. As far as we know, right, we actually don't know if you and I see the same color. Very hard to prove. If I say this is, what is this? Beige. You will also say it's beige. But I can never prove that my beige, in my experience, is the same, exactly the same as your beige. We are forever locked in it. I say beige, you say beige. Okay, yeah, everyone agree that this is beige, that's not beige. But what do you exactly mean by beige and not beige? Psychologically, that's very hard, right? Philosophically?
Because color experience can be very private, so we don't know whether
It's very private, yeah.
yellow is the same as mine, But I think we sort of are able to categorize the colors. Like our views are
Right.
yellowish or bluish, and you'll say, okay, I read this stuff. But we will have each interpretation, right?
Right.
There are some colors that are in between, some are in between.
Yeah, that's right.
Green to me, and maybe even blue to me.
But you will still say we use the same symbol. We use the same output to code that this contrast is this case, not that case. So what it is, color is just at the level of what we can agree on, at least, is some contrast of frequencies. Okay? Contrast of these different combinations of energy frequencies. And we agree that this set of contrasts, which is equivalent to those neurons and not those other neurons firing above threshold and then getting fed higher and higher to visual cortex, to some higher visual level, and then finally to our motor cortex or our verbal, system, saying that, oh, red. And whatever those frequencies are internally for everyone might be different, we don't know, or how the mapping goes, we don't know, but we all agree that there's some contrast, and that we agree where these contrast kind of thresholds roughly are, and we agree that that maps to this verbal signal to say red and not blue, something like that. Okay, so it's a complex answer, but that's why it's difficult, right? And that's why we taught van der Waals and we taught line orientations first in this class. And then a whole field, obviously, is worried about like more advanced stuff like color and objects and stuff. And I dare say that actually we have advanced I mean, you get LLMs and ChatGPT, all these, they can recognize objects already, different colors of it. They can generate movie clips, right? So sort of we've solved that problem, at least at the level of artificial neural networks. Yeah, okay? But it's along that lines of reasoning. It is about what's the base energy you're talking about, the domain, right? In this case, it's frequencies of light. And then once you code that, the data table as that the input is the presence or absence of a particular frequency. So then that goes to binary again, right? So that AI is a binary. It's either 0 or 1. And what it codes is the presence or absence of a particular feature, that feature being the energy. And there you go. You have a data table that you can try to solve using a model, and that means color. That means solving the problem for color. Okay? Does that give you a pass through? Yeah? Okay. Great question. Any others about this other models that we have talked about? Let me draw a line here. Yeah? No? Okay. Any other questions? Yeah?
No one has any question.
No, please go ahead. It's fine. Yeah, don't worry. Yeah.
Because that what your explanation just now, I think is really is correct. Is that I think a lot of things are built in physical senses.
Yes.
Like even image is just about light and heat, and then each light you dot, and then so you can build in like it's just the skill you're talking about, I guess. But
Yeah.
those are like ones and zero, so it's like on and off, right? But I guess then again, when it comes to LLM, I guess a lot of people are talking about, like, for example, emotions, like things that are more like gradients. But I guess in a way, it can also be logical in the sense that if I'm happy, I tend to do this.
Yes.
So it's also just yes or no's. But then again, like I think more philosophical than actually, I think it can be implemented, I guess. It's just that, yeah, philosophically, what does it mean to be sad, for example?
Yeah.
I guess instead of linking activation of like frequencies, control of frequencies, it's just you're contrasting different like logics. If I'm sad, I cry, which is like a logic. If I'm sad, I cry.
Mm-hmm.
But I cry, you come back proud to say like, I cry because of happy. It's sort of like the weight. There's a weight there, but the weight's weaker. I imagine that's the case. But I guess how does like the conventional thinking around emotional states or things that are more, I would say, higher concept,
Right.
higher level concepts are implemented or yeah, how do you get around that?
Okay. Yeah, and that's a very logical extension. So you have things that are physical that we can easily or relatively easily translate to a data table that we can say, okay, there's this stimuli, we have a network, and then we map to some output. It's just a matter of how do we encode or translate this stimuli into a binary sense or a data table sense. But what about something like emotion, which everyone would appreciate that it is not so physical, but it is abstract, conceptual, and actually hidden. Okay? Actually, all this I will be talking about different models that will address these so-called higher level questions. But the quick answer is, again, you have to go back when you ask this question, how do we encode emotion? How does it process? Well, you got to start. What is emotion? Remember how we did for the content addressable memory, right? The problem was about memory, right? We always start with challenging ourselves with the definition again. Okay, we say we want to use a neural network artificial neural network to do memory like human beings. Okay, so then go back and ask, what is memory? What do you mean by memory? Okay, so similarly, what do you mean by emotions? You kind of brought that up just now, actually, very nice. It's like, I have some features or something, and then I say I'm sad. Or I have some experience of something, and then I say I'm happy. And it might be that some certain features originally might think it's more like sad, but actually I kind of have a response, but it's actually because I'm happy or something like that.
And just one example is like,
Yeah.
for example, if my heartbeat is very high, it's a feature of being fearful,
Yes.
being excited,
Or happy. Yeah.
But then, if I combine that with like, there's a lion in front of me, then instantly it sort of filters all the other things away.
Yeah. In that psychological theory, cognitive reappraisal, right? Or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? We don't actually know what we feel, but then after we interpret, then we realize, oh yeah, I was afraid. Yeah, there's a whole.
Or I should be sad.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. And then actually, if you tell the person, wait, no, you're not afraid. You just think of things that way. Oh, yeah, it's okay. I'm actually all right. So it's a good stress relief method. Yeah. So this is great. It's exactly something like that. So you have a separation between what we call the physiological signals from a cognitive interpretation. And I think most literature will agree that, yes, emotion is sort of complicated in that sense that it involves these interactions between these two types of processes. And we can talk more about that later when we go to a candidate model that we think can sort of address this. But I would propose to you that it would be no different than the way you would try to solve a physical mapping problem. It is still about some input, some computation, and then some output. It's kind of sad. Because I realize because it's like, oh, so yeah, we are all just computations of inputs and outputs. Yeah, what's wrong with that? It's okay. Doesn't mean that you are not valuable. Okay? I think we think too highly of ourselves in a sense, right? So to be careful, no, we are all very valuable, but also we need to realize when we talk about, at least when we try to do modeling, right? It's okay to think like maybe that's all we are, okay? To be critical about it, right? Maybe that's all we are, but it's okay because it's not simple at all either, right? Okay? And the wonder is like, well, how did it come about like this in the first place, right? On its own, self-organization, right? Okay, so this is good. So any other things we will pick up more on that theme a bit later also. But any more questions? Yeah.
Well, I guess it's possible that you might address it later. So my
Yeah.
question is, I've been thinking about what are the basis of these
Yeah.
real models.
Yeah.
Like we know a lot of them are inspired by the real models.
Yes.
Some of them is. So my question is, there are some, I guess, many neurons, maybe higher order level, like cortical layers, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So these neural markers has many different types of neural network.
Right.
So I do not know how the integration of different neural network markers can be possible.
So let me check. It's like, are you asking something about like, can I make links between these, something like that, or combine them, or how they are embedded, or something?
Because like in the perception case,
Yeah.
neurons near the eye or
Yeah.
like that higher order level can be very simple. Maybe just participate in one model. But there are a lot of higher level neurons that might participate in many different models. But how can this neuron do this and that?
Oh, you mean like a given neuron that it is part of, let's say, if we think of it as it is in a system that's doing autoencoding, and so it's doing memory, that this neuron is part of that memory and autoencoding system. Can it also be part of or how does it get involved in, let's say, if we ask it to do a perceptron, a multi-layer perceptron kind of process and all that kind of stuff? Yeah. So yes, you're right. Later we will sort of address that, but I would say that actually is that to the neuron itself, it doesn't care. You realize all of the model that we've been doing, the single unit doesn't really matter. It's actually doing the same thing, right? Every time we model a unit, one unit, in all of these different architectures, even if their activation function is different, like, so just to recall, if we have Aj is some function of the weights of the input, dot product between the weights and the input, generically, okay, we can have many layers, so W and AI can have many depths, many layers, okay? So, and we can have different kinds of candidate activation functions. Can be just now that one, the square one, or it can be there, okay? But they're all actually all doing the same thing, isn't it? It's all like I'm just taking input and I'm then spitting out an output depending on something. And the magic really happens is more about how I am connected to others, my neighbors. So the magic is in the architecture. you notice, is that, see, it's one unit connected to another unit, and it's doing the same activation function thing, okay? But the architecture is a single layer, very simple one. This is also another unit connected to another unit, okay? It's doing the same thing there, but the magic is because it's connected in a different way. Same here. This is one unit connected to another unit, and it's just doing its same thing, but it's doing it because in a different context of an architecture. Same thing here. Okay? So you see this motif? It's always doing the same thing. As you say, one single neuron. Let's imagine the yellow neuron is like Alice, the Alice neuron. Alice is always doing the same thing. It's just that depends on where Alice is and where Alice is put, right? That then the whole family of Alice gives you completely different results and has different abilities. Okay? Yeah. So in a sense, biologically, going back to the bio question, it's very efficient because then my DNA just needs to code for how one neuron, how to make one neuron, right? Or at least one basic type of neuron, okay? Then I just need to say like, okay, well, but I'll do it here, I'll do it there, but I'll do the same thing, but I'll do it in different place or in different combinations, and I can do so many different types of computations. Very efficient, right? The DNA only needs to code proteins to generate, I mean, I'm oversimplifying, but it's just essentially only needs to code the proteins to generate one neuron, and just do it many, many times in different contexts. You get very complicated different computations. Okay? Yeah. Any other questions?
This carries on nice previous one.
Yeah.
My question is that I just strikes me as fascinating that the human brain, relatively speaking,
Mm-hmm.
is quite efficient considering its space and how much electrical energy we actually use.
Yes.
Because we are actually like what with every single ChatGPT click, I'm actually like burning like cutting down tree
Yes.
trees or something.
Correct.
Which to me like is this a matter of like where is this sort of efficiency or rather speak like lack of efficiency in like the artificial neural networks? Like is it a problem of design or is
Yes.
it that and possibly also the number of units like neurons we have like what billions in the brain.
Human brain roughly in the order of billions. As I remember, you can ask ChatGPT, but I remember the last estimate I checked was about, in human brain, it's about 8 billion.
I guess that's
Which is still more than ChatGPT, I think. I'm not sure. Well, I haven't checked it last. Yeah, I may have expanded.
Combine the number of humans in the world, multiply that by the then
Let me qualify. The very first instance of ChatGPT or the earliest LLM that did quite successful already, right on, the human brain still has more units than that model. Now I don't know what it is, but definitely the human brain has 8 billion. And when you say efficiency though, it's not about so much of the number, but that, yes, you're right, the energy that was consumed, right, of these units.
And also I guess also speed in a way.
Yeah,
I guess at
sure.
basic level humans are faster, but in terms of higher level stuff then that's really a problem.
I will argue whether humans are really faster. It depends on what you mean, what is your base metric. A flip-flop gate is faster than our neurons, that's for sure, right? So if you talk about that, then we are not faster, okay? But it's not about just the flip-flop gates. It's about, as we said, the architecture, how they are combined, right? Okay, so then when you go higher level, at some point we overtake in our biological computations. At some higher level of complexity, our speed in some problems are still faster. Yeah. However, now, you know, you've used LLMs. Yeah, we are not necessarily always faster.
4 years ago can say that.
So sad. Everything is so sad. It's like, wow, we are just computations, and now we have a computation that's more powerful than us. That if you, some of you, if you attended Brainhack School, the interview with Carlton, right? He said, yeah, the only thing that now we humans should do is, that the LLM can't do is, we can pray. And the LLM cannot pray. It's true, right? Yeah. So sad.
No neuro god, neuro Jesus.
No, well,
Imagine, yeah.
just going into religion. But about energy efficiency and the fact of, the notion of efficiency. I think I would still say the human brain is still more efficient. That's for sure. I don't think anyone would say that LLMs are efficient energy-wise. They consume a lot of power and energy, right? And the way that they are trained requires massive amount, the whole world's over, half a century's, 50 years worth of data that you feed into this energy farm that's consuming electricity 24/7 without rest, at least for the past 10 years or so that they've been training or more, right? You add that all up and compare that to a single baby growing maybe, to 10 years old, right? How much the ratio of the energy and how much more the baby can do than a given LLM, right? So efficiency-wise, I don't debate that right now that we are still more efficient, okay? But, well, that's maybe a matter of time because we are still learning how artificial neural networks work. And actually, and I will share this later on, one insight that I do believe that we have gained from these large language models is I think it's very inspiring. That kind of tell me how we work, okay? And we'll talk more about that later. But it's a very costly lesson, okay? Because we had to do all this LLM thing to learn that. We could have been smarter and learn it just using pure mathematics, I believe. But anyway, the fact is that there's still room for improvement, given that our biological solutions are still more efficient, at least as we know, than the engineering solution right now, the computational solution right now. Yeah. Any other questions? This is very good. So I think you are hitting on like some of the key future problems or current existing unsolved problems. Okay, all right, if not, what I'll do is I will go into some, talk about, with respect to these problems that are raised, and I'll show you why they have been addressed or somewhat addressed in some other models that we didn't cover. We've covered these are the bases, okay? And these next models that I will introduce and talk about can sort of be kind of like different, be seen as different modifications of these bases. Okay, you will see features of these coming out in the next models that I'll talk about, and those models, they are meant to address some of these issues. Okay, I'll introduce one model first, and then maybe we'll have a break, and then we'll carry on with the rest of the class with the other models. Okay, let's see. All right. So the first one, and you aptly raised it as a problem of a visual problem, okay? Visual object recognition. If you've read the Agarwal chapter, which I think is a great resource, I hope you realize it's actually a pretty good resource. If you manage to read through the whole book. It's a lot, but I think he writes very well and he gives good examples and he digests the math in a way that if you spend time with it, you can grasp it, okay? And personally, he has a lot of exercises there. It's a great resource. He has a lot of exercises there that I think all of you can try because you now have the tools from this class. You know how to approach those problems, okay? Before this class, I think how do I solve this problem is a bit difficult. But I think now that you have been, struggling with our assignments, those questions in there, you should be able to give it a try. And I think you'll learn a lot. Okay, so why I raised Agarwal chapter is because historically, this was the first problem for artificial neural networks that was sort of the first big hurdle that was crossed was how does our visual system, again it's always visual because we know the most about our biological visual system. How do we recognize visually an object? I mean, it's so simple to us that we know that this is a pen, this is a cup, whatever, but how does a dumb artificial neural network, just because I put those neurons together, how does it do it, right? How does it do the same thing? And that was the very, very big question. And I think it must have been about 30, 40 years ago already that they were worrying about this question, okay? And in Agarwal, he mentioned this. This is the very first successful artificial neural network that we had. It's called LeNet, the net, okay? And what LeNet is, it's basically what we call now a convolutional neural network. And many, many people have heard CNN. Okay, it's a CNN. And essentially what a CNN is it looks like this. You have some image. So like you see, maybe this is a cat. I draw a cat. Okay. Can't draw cats. Okay, something like that. All right, so you have a cat. Okay, and you have LeNet. LeNet will look at the cat. Okay, and LeNet looks like this. I'm trying to draw a 3D image. Okay, because it makes better sense this way. LeNet roughly looks like this. You have a picture, you give it to LeNet. LeNet has many layers, and after training or something, it will be able to recognize and say, oh, cat or dog or something like that. Okay? All right. Think about this because we have some sort of a resemblance of this in one of our models, isn't it? Can someone suggest which one of our models does something like that? I know cat is not binary. Cat is not binary, but let's imagine this is a black and white cat. So maybe this is like, what we do is, let me use, if I want to make this into a data table, just now we said, as long as we have so for a physical system, okay, if we want to start solving this, we convert this into a data table format, which means the best one is a binary one. So let's simplify the problem and let's say that this image is not first, let's make it a gray scale image, not even a black and white outline drawing of a cat, which is actually exactly what I have here, right? So what this means is that if you make it into grids, so that this is this line, this is this line, this is this line, this line, this line, right? It's a set of line orientations, just like what we did just now, okay? And we can then say that, well, this is input. And what this input is an array of, is there a horizontal line, is there a vertical line, is there a horizontal line, vertical line, something like that, okay? Or let's make it more complicated. Actually, it's not going to be simply like that. It's going to be something like, this is the set for, let's say, vertical lines. This is the binary set, okay, for vertical lines. So 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Which means that every time there's a 1 at that location of x and y, okay, that means that there is a horizontal line at that location. Got it? Right? Okay. Then we might have another channel. Now let's call this a horizontal channel. And in this case, there is a horizontal channel, you can fill it up with the ones and zeros. And then we might have a oblique channel, different channels encoding for different features, the presence or absence of those features. Okay? So we basically decompose the image into different channels. Okay, that's what LANet did. Okay, that's well, later instances. Okay, that's what generally convolutional neural networks do. Okay, they take an image, they have decompose it into different channels. The channels can be about sub-features, or they can be about different colors. Okay, but basically one image can be broken down into these different data tables. You see the path? How you can move from something complex like this towards something you guys have been working with already, okay? Because now you have a data table of ones and zeros, okay? You also have cat as an output, and we already dealt with, like, let's say cat is this output, and let's say dog is this output. So this is cat, this is dog, and then let's say this is bird, let's say this is tree. Okay, let's say we have all these different possible binary outputs and they represent cat, dog, bird, tree, right? So then the problem becomes, I have those data tables, I feed it into my network of weights, I have cat, dog, bird, tree possible outputs, I have some error, I feed it back, and I do this over and over and over again with much more instances of different examples of cats, until my network now recognizes that next time I see some combination of lines, which means some combination of these ones and zeros, okay, that my weights have been, these weights, these W's, okay, have been adjusted so that my resulting output will be 1, 0, 0. Okay? Okay. Which one of our network does that? MLP. Okay? We do it. It's a CNN, but it's doing MLP. It's doing backprop, but if you convert it into this problem, okay, it's using backprop, but in this architecture. So going back to how you might use the same thing, but in different contexts to achieve different things. So there's nothing different about what this is doing fundamentally than what we have been doing in backprop. To qualify though, obviously every different model, they will have different settings and hyperparameters and maybe subtle variations in the features. But in principle, okay, the mathematical core of it is similar. In fact, might be equivalent. Okay? Okay, so that's how we get color. Because we have RGB channels. Yeah? Convert it to a data table and then map it to saying red, blue, purple, yellow, etc. At a particular, okay, so one thing I haven't talked about yet, very important, but I'm first having to say you break it down into this data table and then you map it to these outputs first. But so we get this notion that there is color somewhere, or that there's a cat somewhere in this picture, okay? There's another element that I need to raise next. Okay, but we get that first, this set first. Any questions about this part? Okay. Another important feature about LANet or CNNs is it's actually doing something like this, and I'll use another slide next to. Notice how I draw my layers as kind of like shrinking. Okay, you have to ask why you have to do that. Okay, it's because what LANet or CNNs do is they do a kernel compression. Okay, and let me erase that bottom part. I'll use the same slide so that we don't have any problem. We understand the data tables. Okay. Ooh. Wow. Interesting. Okay. All right. What it does is it does compression of a particular kernel, based on a particular kernel that is applied, kernel compression in a well, actually I should say, sorry about that, spatial kernel compression. Compression of the information that is within a spatial kernel. What is a kernel? A kernel is like, it's basically like a filter, okay? So it's like instead of, so this input, this this unit here, okay, doesn't receive everything from the whole previous layer. It only receives from a kernel, a restricted, constrained, spatially constrained array. Okay, so remember this one previously was all like zeros and ones. I mean, we have these channels which are all zeros and ones, but when we feed it into the layers, they are also zeros and ones, right? Okay, so you have ones and zeros, etc., right? But we are talking about only this set of ones and zeros that will be used to feed to the next layers ones and zeros, okay? All right, so then that instantiates a spatial kernel compression such that, let's call this a hidden layer unit 1 is having a function that is related to the weights, okay? So let's call this weights input to H1, right? So these are A input, A hidden 1, okay? So A hidden 1 takes the product of A W I H1 with this one, okay? You understand this notation, right? Okay, so you have this, and moreover, this is spatially constrained, okay? And the function could be something like, let's say that AH1 is simply the mean of those values in AI that are within that spatial constraint. Okay, so let's do a concrete example. I'll do this one instance, and then we'll take a break, okay? So I'm going to expand the yellow. Oh, sorry. Let me do the whole big white one. Then it'll make better sense. I'm going to move this over to here, okay? So the big cat, the original input might be something like here. Okay, I'm not going to draw the whole thing, but I'm going to say that this yellow bit, let's say that the yellow bit is this 9 blocks here. And maybe this is 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3. Let's say that the value that is encoded in those units is 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, whatever that means. Okay, it doesn't matter. Okay, then I have the smaller AH. So this is AI. And then I have AH1, and it's smaller. Okay, and let's say that AHI is only 3 by 3. Okay, and I'm going to say that this unit here takes the compression of those 9 units in AI. And how so? Let's say that this is the mean of AI. The mean of AIK, all 9 of them, because there's 9 units in AI that I'm focusing on. And the mean of it is what? So the next layer's value is a summary of the previous layer's like spatial kernel. Okay, and the function could be mean, it could be max, it could be some nonlinear or whatever. Doesn't matter. Whatever it is a summary of those 9 units that now get compressed into this 1 unit's activity like this. And then the magic happens next is I move to the next 9 units. And let's say now this is 2, 2, 2. Okay? And then I say that this one is also 2. Can you see how that? So it's a moving kernel, it's a moving window. and then it's taking those local information, compressing it, moving to the next one, local, compressing it. And then imagine you're doing it over deeper and deeper layers. So what's the result if you expand from this? Is that those deepest layers are going to get very compressed information, number one. Number two, that information is going to come from all over, anywhere in the picture. Because by the time you get to the deeper layer, you are getting less and less selective to one specific location, isn't it? You are getting more like the general gist of the image. Okay? Like if there's a cat here or if there's a cat there, at the deepest layer, it doesn't matter where it is, it's a cat. I see a cat somewhere in there. Okay? If you train it enough. Or if you give it enough pictures where cats are all over the place, right? Yeah. Okay, at least we know that if you do it that way, the information is there for it to extract. Okay? Whether it can generalize or really think and like what the notion of a cat, that's a different thing. But at least in terms of the data, if you have data like that and then you train it, then that deepest layer would recognize that wherever the cat is, as long as there's this combination of a set of features that looks like a cat, it's going to say cat. Okay? All right, so this is CNN. Any questions? And yeah, I forgot to mention. We said that this has properties of MLP. There's one more property that we are familiar with that is used here. Which network do you get that we did? Any guesses? It's unsupervised learning, UL, the von der Malsburg. Okay, you know why? It's because of the spatial constraint. Right? Remember, your von der Malsburg network is about like this neuron's activity depends on my neighbors. It influences the neighbors, but not the neighbor's neighbor. Or it influences the neighbor's neighbor, but not anyone else. So there's a spatial constraint there, right, in the unsupervised learning. So that's there. That's what the kernel is some sort of a spatial constraint. So we've integrated MLP and UL into this, or at least in convolutional neural networks, the way it works has elements of the MLP and the UL that we've been talking about. Make sense? Okay, and in so doing, it's trying to solve these higher level visual recognition, visual object problems that we mentioned. Yeah? Whether important features will be lost? For example, like what? Yeah. Yes. Great observation. And essentially that is one of the big problems, right? It's like, how do I tweak my model so that while I do this compression or summary, that then I don't lose details and stuff. So if you go back to the Agarwal chapter, you will see the model is not so simple. It's got a lot more depth and other tweakings, right? I'm glossing over details. But those hyperparameters become very important, right? Exactly how much, what, is it the average? Is it the maximum? Should I use, how big should my kernel be? So for example, obviously, if my kernel is very big, like instead of just 9, I use 20 to summarize. Then 20 voxels or 20 units worth of information become 1 unit information. Yeah, a lot of information is lost. But if I make my kernel small, the smallest possible kernel is 1 to 1. I don't even consider the neighbors. I just say, no, this one just maps directly. But that is like the extreme. Then I don't gain any information. So somewhere about finding the right kernel size and then finding the right kind of function to use will be important. Those are hyperparameters. Will be important in determining whether you lose, your model is efficient or is it losing information, important information. Yeah. And also, we have to take into account, it's not necessary that we have to use the same hyperparameter set for every layer. We can make this layer more sensitive. saying that the resolution is smaller. Then as we go higher up, then we let the kernel become bigger. We can do that, yeah. Okay, and we don't have to use the same summary function. Maybe here we use average, but maybe later on we use maximum, softmax, or whatever other functions. Yeah. So great question. Go and play with it. Make your own CNN. You can make your own CNN, and then play with those parameters and see how the model performs. You know how to evaluate it, right? I hope that's the point of the class is to do that. Any other questions about this? Okay, if not, what we'll do, we'll take a 5-minute break and then, go restroom or whatever, and then we'll come back and we'll carry on to the next model. Right, let's carry on, and then we have. Hopefully, you can cover everything, and then we can have earlier break or something. Next problem is something like emotion or like more abstract notions, and I will argue actually speech or actually language. Is as abstract as it gets. Okay, so just now was like physical light properties, and then I realized that they have some organization principle to that is a cat, or because of the way they are physically arranged. But language is abstract. Because why? What does abstract mean? The only meaning or significance of those sets of features is imagined by you. There is actually no physical constraint. Like the cat is a cat because it exists in this common space and its molecules and atoms are bound together. So it's a concrete physical piece of information. The language is, yes, there is some common binding of the auditory features or the symbols or the letters or whatever, but the binding is not inherent in it. The binding is you. You did the binding, okay? It is only meaningful because the speech or the language is only meaningful because you interpreted it that way. There was nothing in the external physical environment unlike the cat, okay? So speech recognition, this problem, or language processing, this problem, okay, is then a class of problems to deal with information or representations that are abstract. And hence we have this field, right? NLP, which gives rise to the monster we have nowadays, LLMs. Okay, so this problem. So after they solved LeNet, or after they made LeNet and then they solved the CNN, they have this early versions of this problem was in things like, you guys know, okay, these poor imitations of human language, right? That, okay, Eliza can counsel you. You tell Eliza will ask you, how are you today? You say, I'm not feeling good. And Eliza will say, oh, why are you not feeling good? Blah, blah, blah. Just taking elements of those and then repeating, and then it seems like doing that, you feel as if Eliza can talk to you. And then she'll do as well, something like that. Well, it's more about object manipulation, but it's similar. Okay, taking chunks of the language, putting them together in some algorithmic principle, and then gives us the impression that it understands what we are saying, okay, what we are writing or typing. Okay, so early instances, and then now, chat. Okay, how does it do that? How does it work? And then how is it different from convolutional neural networks? Okay, so the solution. I'm not saying that ChatGPT is really entirely a recurrent neural network, but the principle, again, we're talking about the principle, okay? And the principle is about recurrence. Primitively expressed in ELIZA and Shrildu, and very, very, very advanced in ChatGPT. But doing some sort of a recurrent neural network sort of operation. And what does that mean? We actually talked about this a bit in class, right? What it looks like would be something like that. Again, always, I have an input, okay? This goes into my first layer, all right? Well, actually, let me clarify. Oops, no. This would be input 1, okay? And then this would be some stimuli in the environment. Let's say the word the. Okay? I don't want to quote too much to write. Okay? So let's say I have a stimulus, and the stimulus is the word the, okay? And let's say I've solved the convolutional neural network problem so that I can recognize that this is a T, E, H, and E, right? And that this means the, okay? Visually, okay? So I feed it into this first layer, input layer AI1, okay? Which has weights AI to AH. And then I have hidden units in there. And it has, I'm going to make more space for myself. Okay. It has output with those weights to give it output, and the output is to say cat. So convert to data table, no problem, right? The maybe is 1000, okay? And feed it to these weights, and the output should be something like cat is 100, like just now, okay? So let's say 1001 is the, and then 100 is cat. So I'm solving the problem of how to make 1010 equals to 100. That's the W in between, right? Very simple. Okay, so I have, now this is the very first instance, right? If I say the, you know that the next word should be cat. Grammar already, right? Sort of. Okay? Because if I say cat, you won't say the. It will only be if I say the, you will say cat. Okay? At least insofar as this training is concerned. Okay. Then what do I do next? I take the same model, but I have what we call recurrence weights. Okay? And what I do, I give it now cat. Okay? And I train it to say eight. Okay? I can draw it out. So the cat ate the again. Okay, so there's some so-called almost conflict, but not really. You can fill in all the values, okay? But you can train the network so that if I say the probability that it will say cat next is pretty high, but the probability that it will say 8 or the again is pretty low. It might say the rat, because the rat is one possible instance, okay? So how does it know to say, in the first case, how does it know to say the cat and not to say the rat? Because of these. What these WHH's recurrent connections do is tell AH that you should say cat because, and not rat, okay? Because previously you have not yet encountered ate, the, and cat, right? But if I now say the plus you have encountered the cat ate, this together implies that if I now say the, because I have already seen the cat ate, and now you give me the, therefore this should give me rat and not cat. Whereas here, there is nothing else, just the. So the first the, I should say cat. Okay, within this training set, this is the logic. Correct? And it's only possible, mathematically, it's only possible because of these WHHs, right? Otherwise, the will equally lead to cat as it would lead to rat if you didn't have that connection. If you didn't have that, what we call, this is the prior. And this is the posterior. Those of you who know Bayesian will know how this totally makes sense. Okay, in a Bayesian model, right? You have the prior, and the prior is dynamically updating, and therefore the posterior will change according to what your prior is. Okay, if your prior the has no other instance occurring before it, the posterior will be cat. If your prior the is coupled with the is a more complex prior, the prior is the given that the cat ate, then your posterior will be rat. Okay, so in terms of information, this is how this model does it, and this is how this model functions as if it has grammar like us. Right? Because you can totally see this is a complete sentence as any human might say, the cat ate the rat. Okay? Again, very primitive level, okay? But essentially, the very, very advanced application in industry, in NLP, what they have done is basically taking this notion of, I give you a token, the input token, and then I ask you to generate the next symbol, and I do this over levels of complexity. I can expand my prior to not just one sentence, but many, many sentences, or many, many paragraphs, so that I can totally, very precisely predict what the very next word, and I don't even have to just predict words. I can predict chunks of words, or chunks of sentences. I can predict a whole paragraph also. Okay? So different scales of this, but based on this notion that I have recurrent weights. Now, the thing about recurrent weights is that it's not that I have, okay, when I put it this way, you see that this is a very complex MLP, right? So everyone here will have a delta, right? This one will give us a delta, and then I feed it back to adjust the weight. So that's the training thing, right? I have an input, I have an output, and the output might be, before the model is trained, maybe at first when it says the, when I give it the, it might say something like dog, or it might say something like tree, or it might say something like the 8, okay? And that will give me an error, because I want cat. So then cat minus dog is delta, right, the error. Or cat minus 8 is delta. And I use this delta to train the weights, right? This is exactly what we learned in backprop, in the MLP notion, okay? So, when I make this connection where we have these concrete weights, so there's these weights, this weight, and this weight, and this weight, and this weight. Obviously, there's this one, this one, this one, this one. All of these arrows are weights, okay? In one big model like this, as big as your lexicon database of words is, you have this model, okay? It's obviously a nightmare, right? Then you think of it as like one gigantic MLP, multi-layer perceptron. It's not that, okay? It's more like, actually, I only have one model, and this WH is about this layer kind of having weights to itself. So I have an AH, okay, and AH I can make it such that it doesn't connect to itself, but it connects to every other one of my neighbors. But how I stimulate my neighbors is based on my previous state or my previous weights. Okay, so that's how the recurrence is. Okay, so that this looks like that. Does that make sense? Okay, so actually it's not like I have to encode the whole lexicon, one whole like so many units and so many weights. I just need one base one, but I make it such that my WHH encodes the information from prior states, okay, in terms of the way we loop and update. So it's not that we have many, many parameters, but that our parameters change as a function of its previous states in this manner. And then it influences its neighbors like that. Okay? So this is a recurrent neural network. Any questions about this? So then I ask you, I've said this is an MLP. Do you see any other elements of what we've learned before? Although this is a temporal thing, like this time versus the previous time, it's also some sort of a constraint, isn't it? Right? Because I'm influencing my current state at this time. Let's say t equals, let's put this, let's say that this is t equals 1, and then I'm going to say that, let me block this out so it's not too confusing, that this is t equals 2, and t equals 3, and t equals 4. So previously, it was spatial constraints. This is dealing with something else. It's called temporal constraints. Temporal constraint version of the unsupervised learning BDM. I will influence my neighbor in the next step of time, or the next step of time, but not 3 steps later or 3 steps before or something like that. In terms of not just space, but now time. That's the, sorry, excuse me. That's the recurrent part of it. It recurs over time. So any questions there? Okay, so it's an MLP, also sort of like an unsupervised learning in the sense of time. It's a bit harder to wrap your head around time. We're more used to thinking about things in space. Okay, humans are very visual creatures, but we are not so used to thinking about things in time. Okay, and that's primarily because we can manipulate things in space very easily, but very hard for us to change time, isn't it? Okay. However, we are embedded in space-time. Okay. It's just that our power to change things in time is somewhat limited, okay? But we can think about it, okay? And it's a bit harder, but we can think about it. And it's in physical terms, time and space, I guess, if you do understand general relativity, okay, the physics thing, right? There are no different dimensions. Space, XYZ, plus time, just another dimension, no different, okay? And arguably, our network, our brain, is embedded in this 4-dimensional reality, and it has a problem it has to try to solve. Is this information coming in from these 4-dimensional realities? Okay? So similarly, a neural network has to deal with that. It has to deal with this information state that has this 3D visual constraints or binding, but these bindings change over time. And so it has to encode this over time. This leads to an interesting concept that the reason why this object in the physical constraints of the physical world is this object. Remember, we sort of talked about this in the memory encoding thing. This means something now, to us, mostly because it looks like this now, and it is still looking like this at the next instance in time. Isn't it? What defines this object is that its molecules and atoms are staying in the same space all the time. However, you can imagine that if these atoms and molecules are like just not bound together at all, for one instance, maybe randomly it came together, but then very quickly it dissipated. To us, there will be no object, effectively, isn't it? So we are encoding 4D. It's just we don't feel like it. Okay? So similarly, this is not any surprising internal evolution from what CNNs are doing. RNNs are doing similar things just for a different dimension. Make sense? Okay. All right, so I'm going to move on now. Yeah, sure. The concept of long-term memory, does it come from this kind of recurrent model? Not just, I will argue, yes, but not just long-term memory, but that long-term memory is a matter of scale. In fact, short-term memory too. Okay, so great question. I just said that this thing persists in our perception because these objects exist in this space over these few seconds of time as we experience it. Okay? When we are talking about more longer scales of, we start to go more and more abstract, right? That I have this notion of a culture, a society existing over many, many millennia, evolution over thousands, billions of years, right? There's this object in my mind that exists, so that in my very, very abstract semantic long-term memory kind of representation, yeah, I'm encoding something. So the token there would be whatever that notion you are, and how it relates to other notions, how they are linked to other ideas, other abstract concepts. And so that's why you are right in that, let's say, let's try and pin it down to some biological substrate. What is AH? What might AH be in the brain? Some people think it's hippocampus. I argue it's not. I argue it's frontal. Okay? If you guys know the literature on memory formation and memory consolidation, okay? And also if you know the literature on lesion studies, very famous patient, right? HM. HM lost hippocampus, no hippocampus. So HM cannot form new memories. But HM remembers what he did like as a kid, as a child. So means that his long-term memories are not in the hippocampus, they are somewhere else, okay? But he cannot form new ones. So the hippocampus is required to initialize these weights, but over time, you get these reorganizations. So recurrence does that. It reorganizes your previous weights. So your previous encoding gets reorganized. And this reorganized means, in terms of our biological system, means that that information is translated to other parts of the brain. And I think at the moment we do think that it is frontal, okay? Frontal cortex, or at least distributed in some form in other non-hippocampal systems. So yeah, totally long-term memory just about scale. And then, but when we talk about scale, it migrates. The information is never statically in one location, at least in the system. We'll talk about that actually also. That touches on one of the that's where the insight from LLM comes in very, very interesting, I think. Okay? Yeah. Any other questions? That's a great question. Okay, then let's move on to some other neural networks. Okay? So we have the problem of depth of concept. So we went from concrete to abstract. Now the link is, it seems like depth and abstractness is important. So because the RNN was kind of like the introductory kind of lynch point, okay, or a hinge to this actually bigger monster that we now realize is that because, as we said, RNNs sort of was dealing with language, and we kind of implicitly realize now that language is actually a very abstract thing. Now that we realize, oh wait, actually what's more important is to solve mappings about abstract problems, not so much of the physical, visual things like CNN, right? So then depth becomes, now takes central focus in that, and when I talk about that, obviously I'm talking about deep neural networks. DNNs. By that token, an RNN is a deep neural network, okay? Just that there are deeper neural networks than just simple RNNs, okay? And these are now new classes of complex RNNs or DNNs, right, that are used to solve problems to do with abstract information. Because the information is not a shallow level. The information seems to be that from the shallow level, there seems to be something else driving that, what the observed layer is. Okay, so some samples of, when we talk about DNNs, some possible DNNs, because this is like, there's no constraint here now. You can be, anything. What are DNNs? DNNs might take this form. And if you have a DNN, when I draw it like that in vector notation, I hope you know what I mean, right? So this is AI, AH, which could be many, many layers. It could be AH1, AH2, AH3, etc., until you come to an AJ, okay? Right? And when you take this form, and obviously you would have weights in between, and when you take this form, then you will see that what it is doing, just like in the CNN, it is doing data compression or information compression. So that when you have some observation at the leftmost layer, and then you squeeze that into smaller dimension space, you reduce dimension. That's why this is a cup. I say that this is a cup and not a bunch of atoms located at XYZ, XYZ, black atoms here, purple atoms there. I don't say that. I say this is a cup because I have compressed and reduced the dimensionality of these very, very many features into one concept, compression. Okay? You can have this. You can have this. Expansion. I can say from a cup now, I generate notion that I can drink from it. I can use it to throw. I can use it to, I can burn it. I can do many, many things with it. Expansion, okay? Generate other responses, okay? You can do this. And this is I take this atoms of visual things, compress it, and then I generate some actions. What I've done is I've transformed the format. Okay? This RGB format has become some motor format in a very, very complex way, but that's what it is. Okay? And then maybe I don't want to have any like very more complex kind of transformation, but I want it to, from a single concept, from a smaller space, right? But then I want to imagine or play with it in my head, and then, but I still produce only one simple thing, okay? So this is more, primarily more the generation part, generate part, or imagination, or simulate in my brain, that when I see something, I can imagine all sorts of things that I can do with it, or what it might mean, and all that. And at the end of the day, I still do one thing, or a few things. Just a few examples. When we talk about DNNs, as I said, there is very, very little constraints, and then but depending on the architecture, again, the neurons, the nodes are all doing, as far as each node is concerned, is doing the same thing, but because it is embedded in a different architecture, the system produces different results, or is used to do different operations. And then similarly, you can combine, which I've already done, right? Sort of like I've combined the compression, expansion in different ways. And if I want to talk about the previous things that we've been using, so let's say I have a CNN and I have a RNN, right? and then I combine them with a DNN. So all of those are up for grabs. You can take any network because they're all using the same basis of neurons connected to other neurons, just in different architecture, and then resulting in different different computations or different transformations. Yeah, and generally, what people do is to have a pooling layer. Pooling layer is a generic way of, and this is an output vector, okay, which is a convenient way, not that we operate this way necessarily, but in principle you can understand that that each location, each unit is a set of actions, okay, and that the pooling layer is the probability that a given set of actions is selected, okay. So, for example, I just said I see this cup, okay, and my brain does all sorts of funny things, and then results in a pooling layer, and this unit becomes active, okay? Let's say that this becomes 1 and everything else is 0. What that means is, when I saw cup, okay, my pooling layer went and said that the motor computation to say cup was selected and everything else was turned off, okay? Because I could have also selected, maybe this was on, and instead of saying cup, maybe it says take the action, take the cup, something like that. So another set of actions. So, but depending on how the network was computing. Does that make sense? Okay. So I can combine all of that, and then I put it into a summary pooling layer to decide which action to select. And how to be concrete. Usually in modeling, yeah. Oh, sorry. One very common modeling to use is this softmax function. This is a softmax. Okay, if you understand the equation, what this means is that the distribution or the value of a given state as a ratio of the sum of all the values of the other possible states, right? So that softmax will always will range from 0 to 1 maximum. In other words, it's a probability. Okay, so the probability that any given state will be that it occupies as a proportion of all its competing possible states. So if there are no other competing possible states, then this action probability will be 1. If there are many alternatives, then a given numerator contribution will be less. Correct? Okay. So that if I see this cup, and there are many things to do with the cup, then the probability of me saying cup is going to be very low. I might choose any other things to do. But if I see a cup and the state of saying cup, then there's very little other competitions of things to do. Then the probability of me saying cup is going to be very high. Okay? So that's going to determine this pooling layer. I have to mention this because later on I will introduce to you one of the models that the lab has been working on. And the pooling layer is one of the elements because we haven't talked about it before, but I'm introducing it first here. Okay, any questions about this? Combining and then like how do you use it how to link from some input to output, but then these outputs are possible sets of actions. Okay, And we can go on and on. You know, obviously in this class, this is the last class. We're not going to go into too much detail about any one of these, but I'm introducing these to show you how they all link with what you guys have learned and how you can expand from here. And that the fact is there are many others we do not have time to talk about today. One other one that I should introduce is, there's space, looks like there's space there, is one other fancy model. It looks like this. So this is input. This is output. And so without the next binding I will draw, this is like the transform, okay? But I can do binding between these layers too, okay? And this is kind of like a generative, what they call generative adversarial model, GAMS, okay? I argue that our brain is like this actually. Okay, why? Because the early layers can have possible direct connection to the output layers. But it can also go deeper if it wants to, and then at the deeper layer, at whatever level, it can decide to then go out. So it can have alternatives. Directly go to an output or go deeper, and then go to an output, or go deeper, and then go to an output. And the output can say, no, not enough, go back to the input cycle again before coming back to the output. So you can go here, here, come here, come here, come back here, come back here. You can cyclically inside. The information wave, if you want, the propagation of the signal, can cycle before it comes out. And it can go deeper and deeper and deeper. It can go shallower and deeper, totally depending on whatever loss function you want to use, okay? And my argument would be that this is, if you do neuroscience, you know deformal network in the brain. I think there's a core there that's called deformal network is that thing. That very, very heart of it, that's the deepest of all layers. That's why you see that most people associate deformal network with self. Because your self is arguably the deepest concept you have, actually. Yeah. Okay. We can talk more about all this kind of thing, but then, there will be another course on its own. Okay. So GAMs, and finally, and of course, our 最讨厌的 or 最喜欢的 I don't know, LLMs, okay? At least we can't run away from it right now, yeah. Okay. It's good. It helps us do a lot of things. Just takes a lot of energy. Yeah. Okay, so before I go to the last one I want to introduce, these are the classic ones you guys will probably hear of a lot. So DNNs, RNNs, CNNs, GAMs, LLMs, all these acronyms floating all over the place. And I hope you see that what we've done in class over these few weeks, how those elements kind of like fit into these everyday examples that you guys encounter every day. Okay? Any questions about that, this integration? Because then now we'll move on to something that's not so classical. Yes. Any questions? Okay. Okay. All right. So if not, then I'm going to move on to now our pet model. And you guys are working on that. Okay? it is important to introduce that. Okay, you guys are working on it, but everyone should know it. Okay, how I'm going to introduce this model is I'm going to exactly cover what we did in the paper, sort of, or at least go through the line of thought that was in the paper. And it is theory of mind, as you guys know. The running definition that we have, what is theory of mind, okay, is that you or this system has a belief about another system's belief. That's it. Okay? So by definition, belief about others' belief. Okay? And that you operate based on this belief about what you believe other people believe. And it can have many depths. We call K-level processing. The notion of K-level, meaning you all know this, right? Do I play this or make this decision, gamble, because my enemy knows what I think I know what my enemy thinks I knows what I'm going to do? Or I don't do it because I think that he knows what I'm going to do, therefore I think he knows that I know that he knows that I know. You can keep going on and on and on. And then at the end, you're just frozen. You don't know what to do, okay? No, but the other people, the strategies, they have this notion. So obviously, we do it. We have this debate in our brains, in our biological neural systems. We have this capability, this operation. Can an artificial neural network do that? That's really what we want, isn't it? We want LLM, we want ChatGPT to understand us, to have a belief about what our beliefs are, and therefore interact with us that way. And the reason why it breaks down is because it does not. It does what we call pattern recognition, right? It has been trained on some past human interactions, that if humans say this, then you give it this token, ChatGPT, please write my thesis for me. And then it will write everything for you, right? But really, you don't want it to write your thesis for you. You want it to help you write your thesis, correct? Hope. Okay, so that if you hope that some AI can really get your intention, and then you do that. But, so that's the limit of current neural network models. But is there even an approach to solve this problem? So that's what the TomNet is supposed to do, okay? So we have theory of mind, and it is about a belief about others' beliefs. And the question, the challenge is, what kind of artificial neural network model can we hope to do that so that it can solve this problem? So as always, we need to go back to the data table, how to make such a data table. Then we need to, and to do that, we need to ask, well, what do we mean by theory of mind and beliefs about other people's beliefs in the data sense? Okay? So our definition in the paper was that, well, this is hidden. And we form this belief about others through observing behavior. Right? People have their beliefs, therefore they behave something, do something which we can see, and therefore from what we see, we imagine that they have a belief. You can argue about that, but I think that at least within our real constraint that we have, this is all we have. Okay? So we ask if a system can infer, okay, can infer some hidden piece of information based on what it observes. That we didn't tell it that information, but it observes it, and then it can, it behaves as if it learned those things that we actually didn't tell it, that was hidden from it. So one thing that's hidden, one type of information that's hidden are social networks. Okay, social network is an abstract thing. There's no physical thing. We are in a classroom. Okay, so we have a relationship, sort of, right? But actually, to a non-living or non-conscious entity, there's no such thing as a social network. Correct? It's just a bunch of biological animals, commonly clustered together in space. That's all. But there's nothing beyond that. But we feel like no. I mean, we are different. We are clustered like this, but it's different from some other people clustered in the same configuration in some other context, right? This is totally a hidden concept, right? You can't get this social network just by looking at this so-called behavior, so to speak, on its own. Okay, so let's imagine we have 5 persons. Again, Alice, Bob, Charlie, David, Elizabeth, A, B, C, D, E. Okay, 5 persons. They have some relationship. Okay, and I can say like, let's say, when I put it in bold, it means they like each other. Alice, Bob, and Charlie are good friends. Okay? Elizabeth and David are good friends. But these cliques don't like each other, or they don't know each other. Okay? So this is the social network. Okay? These 3 people like each other, these 2 people like each other, and they don't, and they don't interact between the groups. So that's the physical phenomena, sort of the abstract phenomena. Okay, and how do we convert that into a data table? This data table will be there's several processes to it. We represent that social network as an array, as a matrix, an association matrix. A absolutely likes itself. We don't assume people are depressed. You absolutely love yourself. You would never hate yourself to that extent like that. Okay? A likes B, A likes C, B likes C. A doesn't like D and E, B doesn't like D and E, C, wait. Yeah, okay. And D likes E, they like each other. And the rest are one, sorry. And this will be negative. Did I get something wrong? I probably got something wrong. But you get the idea, right? The ones means that A, B, C like each other, and D and E like each other. The negative ones means that there are 2 groups. Okay? So that this array totally is equal to this graph that I draw. Okay? All right? And they are equivalent. They're equivalent to each other. Okay. Now, so this is not yet the data table. This is still the precursor to the data table. Okay? Then the data table is based on this, actually. I put Alice, Bob, Charlie, Elizabeth, and David in what we call grid world. Grid world because it's actually in grids. You can imagine that they are, in a grid system. So there's X and Y position, okay, and A, B, C, D, E are scattered in this grid world position. And critically, this is at, I can say that this grid world this is the grid world state at time equals tau, okay, and that T so tau can be 1, tau can be 2, or T equals to tau, meaning a whole range of values, and then T can be at time 1, time 2, time 3, time 4, up to time 10. And what that means is that these agents they can move. Okay? And they can move 10 steps. Okay? So let's say this is the first step at time equals 1. Okay? Then at time equals 2, t equals 2, the agents have moved. And then at 3, they move some more. 4, and they move like 10 times. Okay? How they move? They move Q, I, well, I'm gonna not confuse people. P, D, PQ. Yeah, I don't have to. And dot. Oh, there's K. K here. Okay. Okay, right. I have to go and check the form exactly, but this, I think, captures it. The idea is that the direction, which is the force that A moves in a particular direction, that's why there's an arrow there, okay, it's a vector, okay, is going to be equals to the attractive force, that's the Q, okay, the relationship between those two agents, and penalized by how far apart they are, okay? This is Coulomb's law, or even gravitational attraction. But in any case, what this will do is it will determine and this is at time t. At every time, the motion of A depends on how all these other agents are located in the grid world space and A's relationship to all of them. That will determine whether A moves this direction or that direction. If they are attracted to each other, then they will kind of hopefully cluster together, right? And if they are repelling each other, then they will move apart, right? But not so simple, right? Because although I'm attracted to that person very far away, but they're very far away, so the attraction is very weak, okay? Even worse, someone in between is blocking the way that I don't like. So I won't move that way, in fact. I might move somewhere else. However, if no one is blocking, then I will be more free to go. And of course, if we are very close to each other, we'll be very strongly attracted. Even if there's someone blocking, we can push that person out of the way. Okay? So that's how this dynamic grid world trajectory will play out. Get the idea? And you can see how this motion totally is derived from something that's hidden, the hidden state. Okay? And so then we get, now this is the data table. These grid worlds are the data tables. Because the positions of A, P that is at, the probability that A is at position X, Y at time T, okay, and the corresponding position, probability that agent B or C or D or E are at positions X, Y, T at other times. That's the data table, okay? And so this is the cool part, is that these data tables, and this is TomNet. TomNet essentially is a CNN. Because it's a grid world, TomNet has to look at the grid world and realize, oh, there's an A there, there's a B here, there's a C there, there's a D there, right? So it's a spatial problem, okay? But I just said, these people move around. So it's not just a spatial instance, it's a temporal instance as well. So we needed an R and N, space and then time. And then essentially, we need a pooling layer. I'm very, very simplifying the model, okay? But the principal components are there. This gives me an output, okay? Which is sort of the character embedding. What this means is that by training the CNN, RNN pooling kind of model over how these 5 people move in space, at the end, the pooling output, what it is a coding of how A behaves, A's character, okay, with respect to BCD, and B's character with respect to ACDE, etc. So it's a character embedding, okay? So then this is next fed into another CNN, but now I give it a new grid world, A, C, B, E, D. Okay, I feed that there as well, but only at time equals 0. Okay, and then I drive it through the RNN. I take the character embedding, both character embedding and the states of the characters, okay, and then I drive it through, and I get another pooling. But this pooling represents second. This pooling represents the state of the positions of these agents, and it will predict like A, B, C, and D and E. I hope you can see A, B, C, D, and E. Okay. So in other words, after learning from how these people move, it forms a character understanding, so to speak, of A, what does A think, what does B think, what does C think, what does D think. Then when I give this network information with a new possible state, the network tells me that even though I only give it one instance, it generates what it thinks after 10 steps, those agents, how those agents will be positioned. And if it learned this hidden information, it should realize that A, B, C should cluster together and D and E should cluster together, but these two clusters should be apart. Okay? So I'm introducing this as you can see there's elements of CNN, RNN, or the principles of it operating that we've talked about before, but now we've applied it in a very, very complex and advanced kind of thing. That this is theory of mind, or we hope. I'll tell you that now there's paper that think that the way this is done is not necessarily theory of mind. It's just still pattern recognition. Okay? Not theory of mind. Pattern recognition means it can do this, solve this problem, because somewhere in the motion there were clues already into this, in its motion itself. It wasn't learning something deep about the ABCD. It was just repeating what it saw ABCD does. Okay? This is academics. You try something, people have other thoughts, and I do agree. I mean, I don't think that this is completely theory of mind, but I think it's a cool demonstration of how it is like theory of mind, or at least one case of how theory of mind might behave, which then it should call into question whether we have theory of mind or what we think our theory of mind is. Okay? Yeah. Okay, so this is TomNet. Any questions? Is it too difficult? Was it too easy? Or like very depressing, like again, like if this is all we are. Okay. All right, so I reiterate, you don't have to, this has nothing to do with your assignments, obviously, right? But this is for you to challenge you to think. These are the real problems that we are dealing with now. Okay, the last thing, and then we'll call it day, and call it the rest of the course, are for all these models, we have some very, very common issues. Okay, and this is that you should know about. So we'll finish with this discussion here. And so I'm not going to take a break, but if you need a break, you just go ahead, it's fine, okay? So the first issue is about exploding and diminishing gradients. Diminishing gradients. Okay, what this means is it's inherent in the way the neural networks, if you use backpropagation, okay, that's how they work. So let's say we draw this again. We have a multi-layer perceptron. I'm going to exaggerate it like we have many, many layers, okay? And what we do usually is that we have, an input, and then it forward propagates, and then we get a delta, and then we use this delta to update the weights in between. This gives us a delta HK that then we use to update the previous weight, which then gives us a delta HK minus 1, which we do this, delta HK minus 2, and we do this. So from the most external output error, we then use it to change one step in, then which we can then, is part of the computation of that layer's error, which is then propagated, back propagated, one more step in, and so on and so forth. Okay, so when you do it this way, notice therefore that it is possible that, it's very possible, there's two patterns. It's either that the delta is the greatest, and the delta H1 and delta H2 are just shrinking, okay? Because they are calculated from the original, and so depending on how they are calculated, they will shrink, or they will explode. Okay, this depending on the weights themselves, they will either expand, they will either explode or diminish. Okay, right? Agree? Agree. Yeah. So this is the one shortcoming of using backpropagation. Okay, so and LLMs have that, and how do they address it? By having solutions, more data, okay, or regularize, which means normalize. Okay, or this is the best, depth, increased depth, which means increased number of parameters. Okay, so the solution for all these exploding and diminishing gradients is because, like, just in the way it operates, if you hit some sort of a local minima where you have the weights are either too small or too big, then it will tilt the way the error contributes to the learning, and then it will kind of like, force it to go some path that maybe you don't want it to do. And then the way to resolve that are the classics. Would be something like you give it more data so that the weights are not so biased, so that it has opportunity, because the data are inherently variable, so that then the weights it doesn't have to kind of follow one track. It might be detoured another way. It has a higher probability of being pulled another way because your data have greater variance, okay? Or you regularize. You make it such that originally the weights might force the model to move this direction, but you normalize it by pulling it back a little bit. You force it back so that it doesn't go too far off in any direction. Keep it more on the central path, which is the normalization approach. Okay, and then another one would be depth, and depth generally works better. Okay, because it makes it such that the shallower layers become the data for the deeper layers, and the deeper layers can then kind of have more balanced control or balanced input than the shallower layers. Okay, so all these, hopefully, kind of like when in coding world, I'm talking about this as abstract concepts, but I'm hoping you can see that, yeah, in coding world, I know sort of what that means in terms of what kind of code I need to write or what kind of code it might be involved in these steps. Okay, so this is linked to another problem, which is a bigger problem, more general problem. So the exploring and diminishing gradients is like specific phenomena. Like this is what might happen. The gradients might explore or diminish, but really what's happening is the case of overfitting. And I know that maybe all of you, or many of you already are familiar, but just in case, okay, what is overfitting? Overfitting, it looks like this. Suppose I have 5 variables and input variables, and I want to map it to one output variable. And let's say that my data table looks like this, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. Okay, and I say this is 2, 4, 6, and 8. Okay, and my problem is that I have y is equals to some sum of w times x. Well, I don't put the vector because I use the summation. Okay, well, simpler, just do this. Okay, y is equals to the dot product, is a scalar that is a result of the dot product of the two vectors. Okay, we know x. Okay, what kind of vector of w would make this data table consistent? We can do this, right? Let's say w is equals to 0, 2, 6, 4, 8. Correct? If you put w is equals to 0, 2, 6, 4, 8, and you put it as a dot product to x, can you see that it will give you y always? Correct? 0, 2, 6, 4, 8 multiplied by 1, 1, 0, 0, 0 will give you 2. Right? Not multiplied, dot product. Okay? Product of 0, 2, 6, 4, 8 with this row will give you 4. Correct? And so on and so forth. However, you realize the problem? If I set w to be 0, 2, 6, 4, 8, given this data table, what happens if my data is, okay, who can give me, what y should be? What should y be if my input is 5, 0, 0, 0? What should y be? Huh? 0? No. Well, you're overfitting. See this pattern? You're overfitting. Right? You just overfit yourself, which proves my point, right? It's not that we don't overfit, we do. So people complain like, oh no, it's overfitting, that's bad. No, humans overfit too. It's just that we think we don't. We think we're smarter than we really are. But not that it's but that actually, as in we entertain all kinds of solutions, okay? And yes, W will be that solution, but it will be, if you say it's 0, which is if you apply that overfit, you would say it's 0, right? But if you see the pattern, you would realize that that would lead you to an erroneous answer. I mean, it will be correct arithmetically when you apply it, but it will not be maybe what the environment really would be result. You didn't get some deeper principle that might have been working in the environment. Okay? So this is overfitting, that you derive a solution that works for the data, but it doesn't generalize. Okay? And so again, one solution to this would be give it more data, regularize it, or give it depth. Then you will have a better chance of coming up with a solution that's more generalizable. Okay, so any questions to this issue? This is the biggest issue, and it's probably pretty much the only issue that we'll talk about. But notice this, I want to raise this up first, and I'll talk about the very last point. Okay? And the fact that these two are linked. Overfitting means that because I didn't fit the data very well, so I created more parameters or tried to do more things, so that I will minimize the error and therefore I fit the data very well. Okay, so when I have a model that overfits, one solution that seems to be implemented is this notion that then I increase the number of parameters. I make it deeper, or I increase parameters, or I do whatever it is in order to fit the data. Okay, so which means I make my model bigger. Okay, all right. Now, let me put this as the final point here. The notion of LLMs, okay, comes about because big data leading to scaled up model. LLMs are big models because of the big data. And by that principle, which we just talked about, if you have your model's operation such that in order to fit the data, you increase the complexity of the model is actually just overfitting. It will actually not work so well, right? By all this token, by this kind of operation, this implies that LLMs should not work. Okay? And that is, cannot generalize well. There is nothing inherent about the way the LLMs are trained. If we go by the backprop method, and even if we put in all the regularization and all that, I mean, there is no guarantee or confidence even that this approach would even give rise to what we experience today, that it sort of works, right? Okay? Which is why a lot of the computational neuroscientists and all that, they were a bit surprised because they didn't expect it to work. They thought that because in small scales it's true, if you're with these small models, right, that they've tried and they do backprop, it all failed. It didn't really perform very well, okay? But something happened different when they scaled it to the level of the LLM using the level of big data that they have nowadays. So it's very puzzling because the prediction was that it should not work. Number of parameters and error, okay, should decrease, okay, accuracy. Well, I don't want to kind of limit it, the concept, but let's say performance should increase at some level of number of parameters, but then when the number of parameters gets over some threshold because of overfitting, the performance should actually decrease. That's what people expected, okay? But in fact, what they saw with LLMs was something like that. It did decrease, but then it increased again. And nothing in all the principles that we said just now about overfitting and having more and more parameters, you will be more and more overfit, right? Nothing in that could tell us how did this happen, okay? And this is why I say it's cool, because this gives us insight about how we learned because of how they think why it did this. Is that when you have enough depth, so let me draw it out, something that's really, really quite deep. Okay, when you have a model that looks sufficiently deep like this, okay? So when you train these weights, they feed forward. The initial assumption is every unit would have bearing on every input unit would have bearing on every output unit, okay? Just to different levels of contribution, okay? But what they found was that when you have sufficiently deep and sufficiently complex, what the model ended up doing was that it will take this unit and this unit will select some part of the model, not the whole model, okay, in order to generate its output. So in other words, when you have sufficient depth, the back propagation wave allows it to select at some other sub-depth of the model. It doesn't have to use the whole thing. So the overfitting problem is a problem if all the models still contribute. That's why it is overfitting. It's because everything that shouldn't contribute still contributes when it doesn't need to contribute. But when it is sufficiently deep, the way the information is propagated has a phenomena of filtering, so that not all the models, not all the parameters will always contribute in the same way. It will select some, and obviously might select based on relevance, which is based on error, okay? Now, what that means is what's happening is that when you have sufficiently deep models, you therefore also have chances of building smaller sub-models inside a big model, okay? And this, the irony is when you are big enough, then you can have small babies inside that can then do more accurate things, better things. Okay, this is the phenomena from studies of LLMs. Okay, now, this is why I say translate into how we think. Isn't it sort of how our brains behave? Our brains is not like, well, everything's fed in and then everything leads to every output. Our brains have a way of selecting and like depending on the task or whatever, to select the brain regions and the operations that we think are relevant to the immediate task. Therefore, we don't overfit. Or sometimes we overfit, but then we are able to get out of it. Because that we switch. So we switch between modules. So I would suggest that this is phenomena of switching. Or selecting. Okay, however you want to call it. No one's really termed this yet, but the idea is that instead of indiscriminately always responding to everything with different weights and all that, it categorically selects or switches between sub parts of its model. This emerged. This kind of self-organization emerged from having sufficient size, sufficient depth. Okay? Which gives us a clue about how our brain works, sort of, right? And why we require a brain to have this level of complexity, and therefore at this level of complexity, the sorts of things we can do, as opposed to a simpler brain. That's why kids can't. That's why kids overfit, right? Because they haven't made that connection yet, so they are not deep enough yet. They are all very shallow and disconnected. Once they make the connection, it's like now they have the whole thing, and then they have an opportunity to select. Okay, right? That's the speculation. I'm not saying that that's been proven, but you can think of things that way. Yeah. Okay, so just want to put this out there to you. Any final discussions, problems, issues, fancy things that you guys have yourselves you have encountered in your experience with artificial neural networks that you want to bring up? Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say there's certain instances where I'm using ChatGPT, for instance, and it doesn't give me what I want,
Well, yeah.
even though I prompt it, I would say fairly specifically, and then it just goes into this vicious cycle of just like, why are you not understanding this?
It tells you that.
No, I mean, I tell it that.
You are telling. Okay.
And then I guess it's also very human in the sense that, yeah, when you get frustrated, it actually also responds like, not neutrally, I would say. But I think there's just days that ChatGPT is just not really that good.
There are days.
Certain,
Really.
certain,
Do you notice it?
certain days where like, it just doesn't give you what you want.
Wow. You mean it has temperament? Really?
No,
I don't know that. Yeah.
Or maybe it's just how I interpret it.
Oh, okay.
Just how why are you not
Really?
doing this? You should do that. And sometimes he also has amnesia, so you just say that it gives you completely wrong thing, and then
I think it's interesting that you are using these psychiatric terms to describe LLMs. I don't use it so, I use it some, but I don't actually use it so much. But you guys probably might use it more than I do. But if you notice these fluctuations, actually that's interesting to me. Does it have mood?
I feel like it matches how people.
Yeah. Well,
So I noticed like if you, at least for in my experience, if you prompt it a little bit more politely,
yeah.
it will actually not give you that good a result, I would say. I don't know if
You mean you have to be rude to it? Or direct? Yeah.
Direct.
Okay. Interesting.
So it's like opposite. So sometimes people say I have to be polite to
We're getting an A/B tester question.
Hey, this is a cool experiment to do. Does ChatGPT, we obviously know you give different prompts, it will respond differently. But what are the natures? I mean, this is studies, obviously, there's what kinds of prompts, how to use ChatGPT, yeah. But along the lines of mood and emotion, that would be very interesting. And in relation to that day, because maybe the model is working, the snapshot, the checkpoints that the model, although let's say we use ChatGPT 4.0, let's say, now it's what, 4.0i or something. It's a frozen version, so to speak, but actually it might have daily updates, right, based on accumulative training and all that, which might reflect mood of that moment of the world, or whatever database it's pulling from, or whatever database it's generating. Yeah, so then how does our interaction with its daily fluctuation interact? That would be interesting.
Currently now it's like, at least in the States, there's reports of it being like super nice. It always reassures you. Like,
Because they need it.
Someone did something wrong, blah, blah, blah. I think that person's a douchebag, etc. And actually, you're absolutely correct. No one should be doing that.
Really?
At least in the States, there's reports like that. Yeah.
Interesting.
But when I give it an idea here, Taiwanese version, it doesn't like say, oh yeah, that's a super good idea or something. Like it, maybe it's something
Cultural.
Yeah, maybe it's tailored to the American one.
Could be.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, I wouldn't. This commercial. The thing about this is that we do not know what are the tweaks they put how much of it is the original AI and how much of it is some human constraints that are put on it. That to us is not transparent, I think. Yeah.
I guess those are just ideas of weights.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
They have history. I have noticed in teaching writing
Yeah.
my students
Yeah.
that they have also been described, some of them say ChatGPT has a personality, but compared to other, like when they compare different AI platforms,
Seriously?
they would describe
Oh.
the different personalities, and also saying that kind of like what you just said, how it matches the way you interact with it. For
Wow.
example, we have been doing different kinds of experiments,
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
we call it, like depending on how we interact with it. Sometimes, usually it gives you bullet points, but at some point, when
Yeah.
you engage with it, like a human, it stops giving you bullet points. It
Wow.
seems to more genuine when you interact.
Like
But
more like a conversation
yeah,
or
yeah.
a,
So at a certain point, it stops giving you the bullet points. But we haven't really figured out when it switches to that point,
huh.
when it goes back to bullet points again. But that's something very interesting because we're trying to like draw the boundary between human and AI.
Yeah,
But sometimes
yeah.
it gets really blurred. But it's a fun experiment.
Yeah.
Especially when it's a writing course, and I ask them
To
to
write,
AI, but
yeah.
still bring out their human aims. But at some point, they can't really. They're still
It can't tell.
developing their writing skills.
Right,
So
right.
it's like, what is it AI? What is it human? What's the voice?
Wow.
But it's really fascinating to like listen to like neural networks and see like how that is meant to not only reason but
Right.
I have to what you mentioned just now. It says that like there's bullet points and paragraphs. Like sometimes they give you the paragraphs, like an article. So it gives you like bullet points like Wikipedia page, for example. In
Yeah.
my case, sometimes they just ask like, which one do you prefer?
what people ask you.
Yeah. They give you response A, response B. One is
Which?
typically a bullet point,
Uh-huh.
easy to skim through. One is more detailed by paragraph form. And it
Oh.
just asks which one do you prefer.
It asks you.
Yeah.
And then like when you choose, it will like funnel it more in that way. You can choose.
Yeah, it just asks me which one to prefer. But the key thing is that actually both are. There's subtle differences in the way it's like.
But the content is just missing just the raw answers.
No, the content's like a little bit different.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you
Well, then isn't that worrying that if the content is different, it's not just style then, it is actual facts or whatever that.
Well, it's not too different in the sense like the conclusion you get will probably be the same, but it's just
Okay.
the level of detail or something.
I see.
Yeah, that would be just like because in bullet point typically I think it's more concise, but you lose detail in the process.
Right.
Yeah, it's a little bit of that nuance.
Yeah.
But it just asks me which one.
So actually this discussion brings out something interesting, is that nowhere in all of this modeling that we are doing, right, was there ever any question about what is true? What is fact? Because as we said, the key determining thing is this delta thing, which is just what you desired minus what it gave you, and the difference between it is just trying to minimize what you want, right, versus what it gave you. Nowhere is it about what is real, what is true, okay? In the way, at least in this. And so that at the end of the day, what is true is determined by the human who said what they want. So in other words, to the model, what is true is what the human wants. And that's it, right? It doesn't care about what is really true, regardless of what humans want. It doesn't have that because it's not, at this moment, we would say, doesn't have the agency like we do. Like we would, as humans, we would realize we can vet, right? People tell us, and we have agency to decide that I don't believe you. No matter what you say, I don't believe you. I don't care what you want, and whatever, right? We have agency to go into that mode. But the way these work, they don't, right? So in fact, they are more like feeding to what we say. And so, which is fine, because when you want to use it as a writing tool or to kind of interact for some other purpose, maybe that's all what you need is for it to be smooth in the interaction and to gear in terms of the mood and everything. But if people are using it for facts, that is where we we really should be very, very careful. There's nothing in its operation that at the moment, and they know that. They know that the next problem with LLMs is physically, meaning in a sense of the physical world that is factual, so to speak, or real at least, right? That it is not just like humans tell it that this is a cup, but that it itself would know for its own self what a cup means, based on its interaction with the physical environment. And right now, an LLM is trained on higher order data derived from humans' expressions, not its own, like it doesn't have hands and skin to touch and realize that, oh, this hurts, this is hot, or this is comfortable, or this, so it doesn't have that linkage to what is real. And to it, what is real is the human database, not what is the physical environment. We, biologically, what is real is our interaction with the physical world. So that's what's missing. And so it's dangerous that it has moods that are not bound to physical reality. Whereas we have moods, but at least we can agree what is real, right? Yeah. So, very cool, very interesting. Any other questions, issues? Okay, so we've hit time, and I just want to release you guys now with this closing idea of because this course has sort of evolved from the first time I've taught it, like 10 years ago or something like that, where we were just talking about those simple models, right? And in between, suddenly LLMs exploded, and then we were doing. So I've added more and more because I think it's becoming relevant. But I hope you see that no matter how far they've gone, it's still actually those basic models are still actually quite relevant. And if you do not understand those things, but then you are using these tools now like PyTorch, TensorFlow, all this, actually you don't, you can use it, but you don't really understand the more minute details that are actually quite important, I think. Okay? So yeah, that's the end of this course. And I hope you guys have had fun and have learned stuff. And concretely, in terms of gradings and assignments, just remember, if you need help, if you need more time, just make noise. I'm totally okay, all right? Just say that the last day that I have to submit is on the 16th of June, okay? So please don't give it to me on the 16th of June. I need it by the 13th of June, okay? No, next Friday, all right? So that I can have time to read and all that. In general, I think all of you are doing fine so far, okay? I'm not too worried. I think more of you are giving yourself a lot of stress, okay? Really, I'm quite okay with, like, if you go through all those questions and then like you're just stuck somewhere, but then you do kind of like express yourself and do it like that. I'm actually also very fine with that, okay? Because this is not an engineering, we're not telling you to actually solve an engineering problem. We're actually asking you to deal more at the conceptual level and doing these exercises to kind of kick off your conceptual linkages. That's the point. Okay, so that's it for this course. And I hope you guys have a great summer holiday. And then hopefully you can see some applications from this. But if not, it's okay. Anyway, if you learn something, at least not to trust LLMs too much. Or at least don't trust the fashion of what they say too much. Okay? All right, thank you. And have a great summer.